Vampires, werewolves, and witches. Oh my.
Oh my. Have you ever wondered about vampires? Where they came from? Are they real or not? How about witches, werewolves, the man with the hat? All these things we're going to explore today as we are celebrating getting close to Halloween. We're going to shed a little
light in the darkness
and bring about some truth in the myth and mysteries. So tune in today as we're going to have a lot of fun, and hopefully you're going to learn just a little bit about the things that go bump in the night. We're so glad you're joining us for our 60th episode of Live Life in the Spirit. I'm Pastor Penny Schultz.
And I'm Kristen Scherenberg.
We're so glad you are joining us. You can catch all of our wonderful content on our website
at livelifeinthespirit.com.
Or you can follow us on YouTube, Rumble, or any of the podcast sites. And we are sporting our apparel. If you would like to purchase any, you can go right to our site and do so. It's God is still writing your story. Stop trying to steal the pen.
It's true. And if you want some other fun content, we are also on TikTok and X, formerly known as Twitter, and Instagram.
And that segment's called Get Real, where we talk about real life issues. Well, today is going to be a fun episode. We're kind of squeezing this one in. This is kind of an extra one, but we thought we would do it as it is the day before Halloween. We did do an episode on should we do Halloween or not.
That's right. And you'll have to go back and watch that. It's got a lot of really great content and a few fun little edits thrown in.
But today we thought, okay, let's get right down to brass tacks. What about vampires? What about witches and Wicca?
Warlocks and sorcery?
The Black Hat Man. Black cats, bats, and all of the things that go bump in the night. That's what we're going to be looking at today. So we're going to dispel some of the myths. We're going to bust some of the mysteries. And we're going to just
shine a little bit of light and maybe just give you some interesting facts to chew over.
You know, I think that one of the most interesting facts of all this is all these things we think has been sensationalized. Well, it has, because of fictional works and movies and novels, that kind of stuff. But these things have been around for thousands of years. Some of this stuff goes all the way back to almost 2400 BC. So if it really was just all fictional, things don't usually stand the test of time unless there is a shred of something
truth
behind it. Yep. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're going to dig into today.
Well, when you hear the word vampires, what comes to mind?
Are you talking about what the secular has? It's, of course, the guy that is in a black cape who has to sleep during the day because he'll fry in the sun. They drink the blood to stay young. Let's see. The movies have it that they turn into a bat to escape. Mm-hmm. So transmogrification, that's a big word. Yeah. They house themselves in a coffin.
Perfectly normal.
Yes. They're usually pale.
Well, if you never see the sun.
That's right.
Although you'd think with all that blood, that would just, give them a little color.
Except Hollywood now has them looking quite dreamy. But they usually come at night.
It's true.
In your dreams.
It's true.
They live in a mansion.
Yeah, they're always wealthy. Have you noticed that?
Mm-hmm.
They don't make any movies about poor vampires.
And how are they wealthy?
Well, as we dig into this, some of the myths, interestingly enough, might touch on that a little bit.
And the only way to kill them is
stake through the heart.
Or garlic to keep them away.
Mm-hmm. Silver bullets.
True. Mm-hmm. We'll get into that later, too.
Mm-hmm. Well, Hollywood has really done a good job because I think of all the vampire movies I've either seen or heard of, like Van Helsing, Blade, Dracula, Twilight, even Hotel Transylvania, which was Disney's version of that. And then all the TV shows, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Angel, True Blood, the list goes on and on.
Well, we definitely seem to have an interest in, if not an obsession with, these creatures. There are people who call themselves vampires today who get together with other like-minded individuals and participate in a variety of different activities attributed to vampires throughout the centuries. Yeah, that's what a lot of people don't realize, that this has actually become a thing, like a bigger thing. People are aspiring to be.
Yeah, I mean, they'll change their appearance, they will like elongate their fang teeth, and they practice, some of them drinking blood. There's just a lot of the...
It's its own occult in itself right now.
Oh, for sure. So from novels to Hollywood blockbusters, there are many common characteristics, and we've covered quite a few of them, but there's a few more.
Being undead.
Yes, it's true.
It is the eternal life search for, the fountain of youth, so to speak.
Because they don't age.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the literature in Hollywood especially. This is maybe not as well known, but a lot of the myths say that they cannot enter a home unless they've been invited.
Ah, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. You want to talk about a little bit of a demonic history?
Yeah, there you go. Well, we said the elongated fangs.
Mm-hmm. They're turned away by garlic. We talked about that.
I want to drink your blood.
That's creepy. Burned by holy water.
Ah, burned by the sun.
Mm-hmm. They are killed by silver bullets or that stake to the heart.
They cast no shadow or reflection in a mirror.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Okay, Kristen, so let's get into the vampire. And we're going to do him because he's probably one of the most known ones right now, although everybody's become sensationalized. But throughout the history, what do we know about vampires? Where did this actually come from? Are they even real? Are they not real?
Well, there are some human illnesses that some of the myths probably came from. So there's several different types of porphyria, and that particular illness, someone can't be in the sunlight. It does actually burn their skin if they're in direct sunlight. And there's people to this day that suffer from that illness. And
let's be honest, this is more than just like if I'm riding in the car and the sun's burning my arm, oh, that hurts. Or if I'm outside, or if I'm just fair skinned. No, this is like an inside that you're like burning up as well.
And it's very painful. It completely alters their life. I mean, they can't go outside without some kind of protection on during the day.
And this is actually a mutant chromosomal gene that one side is taller than the other. If you have a mother and father who another one has like a longer gene and they kind of equal themselves out, you won't. We even have somebody from one of our churches that has dealt with this her whole life. Now her sister actually ironically has it as well, but their brother does not. And I don't think that there is a difference between like male or female, like more common. It just in how
how the genes were divided up.
That being said, some of you watching, there's like only 20,000 in the world that actually deal from this. So it is a specific disease or a chromosomal deficiency. But they have come out with an implant now, but it is extremely like off the charts expensive. And so a lot of people are having to wait because insurance is not paying for it. So they have to wait until they can go on Medicare and have a Medicare G, I think, is the one you have to have in order to even pay for this. Because we're talking like $143,000 every 3 months.
That's insane.
It is absolutely insane. But it just came out like in 2019.
But for her, it's been a complete life changer because she was showing us over the summer. She's like, I have a tan for the first time ever. I have a tan. I mean, she's never been able to
couldn't even go on vacations or trips because of the sun coming through the window. So that was a thing, but it actually kind of started in a group of people. It was more common, I should say, over in
Transylvania, Romania. that
Russia,
area. And there were so many different, I mean, obviously the science advances that we've had now are not what they've had in medicine back then. And they couldn't explain it. And they tried lots of different things. And apparently at some point in time, they thought if they could drink blood from someone else, that would help ease some of the symptoms. So then if that rumor got out as part of that, along with being burnt by the sun, that started some of this myth, and where that kind of the porphyria part of it came in.
Another is that there really was actual covens. You know, you have a blending of a lot of things. So there were actually satanic covens over in that area in Transylvania, and it was more of a blood sacrifice. And they do, and that we kind of talked about this before, the darker, as if there isn't enough dark enough side of the satanic cult, but the darker side is the sacrificial rituals and rites that they do, and they literally drink the blood, and it is for that eternal youth to bring in that energy and that life force. But without even the blood, then there's also, we've talked about that with red represents energy, and there are actually energy suckers, people who will steal your energy. You've been around that, like you were feeling fine, and then you were around the presence of somebody, and you left there, and you just felt drained.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
Like you had no energy left. So you combine those two together. It could either be the literal blood, or it could be the energy life force. So that's where we get some of this.
Some of that, the myth behind the vampire. And it's interesting, the earliest reference that I could find to the term vampire is from an old Russian text that was from 1047 AD, which isn't as far back as some of this stuff that we found.
But we're talking,
that's still
1,000 years after Jesus. I mean,
right, that's still a long time ago.
So as this has morphed through the generations and through the centuries, I think it brings it up more to medieval time, and even after that. Where did that whole stake to the heart and silver bullet thing come from?
Well, there was a lot of discussion that there were, obviously they didn't understand. And because there's a genetic component to it, you have to understand that there would be people in family groups or royalty or whatever, and especially during that time, perhaps if there was some intermingling amongst family members, then the prevalence was higher. And they didn't understand, and if the rumors were flying about drinking blood and not being burned by the sun and just some different things, they had fear because they didn't understand what was going on. So then that's where like the stake through the heart came in, because after they were dead, people would go and almost like they would exhume the body and stake them through the heart to ensure that they stayed dead. They just had this fear that
because
there
back
was
then
something
sometimes
different.
people were buried alive and then they weren't dead. So they think they came back from the dead, but they were never dead to begin with.
Right. So then there was also there was just a lot of things that happened because they didn't have the medical knowledge. But that's where the term dead ringer came from, in case you didn't know.
That's right.
They would tie a bell or tie a string on someone's finger and tie it to a bell that was up on the thing. And so if someone woke up in their coffin and they were not actually dead, they would ring, and the night watchman, or like the night shift, they would sit in the graveyard shift, the graveyard shift, that's where that came from. Someone would sit and listen for the bell, and then they would holler dead ringer if they heard the bell, because then they would have to go dig
There were a lot of
up.
things at that time that people were like in comas for, or they, I can't remember which illness it was, and people were burying them way too early. And they started realizing this. And so actually then the capitalism on that was they started selling all these coffins or caskets that had air vents and had a way to put food and water in there, which is interesting.
Talk about the food and drink offering.
Yes, exactly. And whistles and different things like that you could do. But I bet you a lot of things that we have used forever, the graveyards, that we don't realize where
those terms came from. Yeah. So another part of this vampire myth, some believe or attribute to Vlad the Impaler as Vlad Dracula the Third, I think it was. And there's some suspicion or suggestion that that's where Bram Stoker got some of his Dracula inspiration
Dracula,
from.
so that we move from vampire to Dracula.
Yeah. But Vlad the Impaler, it's noted in history that he did some pretty horrible things, and he was a warmonger, and he was a warrior, and it was suggested that after battle he would sit amongst the people that he had killed and eat, and he would dip the bread in their blood, and that's another suggestion of where that gory drinking of the blood or eating of the blood came from, was from that.
Okay, and again, satanic, not
right, not
pagan, not of God.
No.
Yeah. So also, I want to bring in. We've always said that there's an evil component a lot of times with some things are just benign, but something like this that has stood the test of time forever. The enemy always wants to take everything that Christ has done and skew it.
Absolutely.
Or take it the opposite. And so if you remember with the disciples, right afterwards with communion, when they were saying, Jesus said, this is my blood, we drink the grape juice or the wine. It's a symbolization. But people were thinking, when he said, this is my body, that they were cannibalists, that they were eating flesh and they were drinking blood, and that was not the case.
Right.
But what is it that you see in the covenants? It's actual
they will actually do
blood
that
and flesh, right?
So, and then also, I mean, there is so much in the scriptures that talks about not consuming the blood, that is our life force, and it is strictly forbidden by God multiple times throughout scripture. And so when something is that rigidly, repeatedly, there's something to that, and so anything that does that, that's not of God anyways.
No.
And we talked about that whole life sucking, and yes, there are certainly people that can do that, but there are also demonic spirits that absolutely can just suck the life out of you. If all of a sudden you start to feel like that's happening to you,
the energy is just gone.
Right. Then that's very possible that you've got something hanging around.
Well, so we've kind of looked at vampire and Dracula, and now we're going to move on to werewolves. And like we said, since Twilight, well, everything has been sensationalized by Hollywood here lately. But where did the werewolves actually come from? And this will surprise you. It goes all the way back to the Epic of Gilgamesh. There is so much from Gilgamesh, and we've talked about that with the fallen realm and the gods and all that kind of stuff. But it's a story of Gilgamesh rejecting a potential lover who had turned her previous partner into a wolf. Or from ancient Greece, this goes all the way back to the legend of King Lyson of Arcadia. And a common source of werewolf mythology in the story, Zeus turns Lyson and his son into wolves after Lyson serves him a meal made from the remains of a sacrificed boy. Now, why I say this is because this is Greek and Roman mythology. This is way back, like I said, the Epic of Gilgamesh. And again, what are we talking about?
Child sacrifice.
Yes. And then spells to change people, to
more transmogrification.
This is not of
not of anything good.
No. And actually, when you think about werewolves, if you know anything about the Native American history and culture and that kind of stuff, they believe in transmogrification. They have, when they worship gods, they talk about turning into a bear or into a wolf, stuff like that. So as we see, there is that connection between the two, because the stories of vampires and werewolves have existed almost as long as we've had oral tradition literature. Slavic history offers evidence of a cultural belief in vampires, not necessarily blood drinkers, but more often ghostly spreaders of disease, dating all the way back to the 9th century.
So that's a long time ago.
That is. So they've kind of paired those two together.
That's interesting. I wonder.
Yeah, well, and then they even get into some, I know this is kind of going back a little bit into that vampire, but the werewolves too, because this is off the rails, and this is not my point of view, but they even believe that Cain's motive, they get into this whole demonic realm. That Cain and Abel were fighting over a woman, and it was because of that's really why Cain killed Abel, because his offering wasn't to God, it was to this woman. See how they're already going, and that was actually Islamic, now that I say that. Mm-hmm. It's Islamic tradition of this part. Mm-hmm. And then they bring in Lilith, and we know that Lilith is actually one of the Dark Trinity in a way.
Like Ashtoreth. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Ashtoreth, Ashtoreth.
And it goes farther than that, because then that they believe that Cain was... well, this was interesting. It says, ancient Jewish philosophers claim that Cain was not Adam's son, but Samuel's son, suggesting that Eve was an adulteress and Samuel was an angel. And so then they're trying to say that Cain was a Nephilim. You know, again, this is not, we're not saying this is truth at all. This has been passed down. Mm-hmm. Now, they believe in Nephilim, and yes, it was from angel and person, but what I was like, all of a sudden, the bells and whistles. I have said for a very long time that I truly believe that Satan, right now, was Samuel. Mm-hmm. And this is the first time that I have ever seen any other literature that has said that, because they talk about this as Samuel is claiming to be Satan. And where did I find it? Under the vampire thing that we're going for history. Again, interesting.
It is interesting. It is interesting. And it's interesting that there's so many people that don't have any concept of the Nephilim or belief in it, and yet even that has been part of religious texts for a long time. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Including the Bible, just throwing that out there. So the idea of silver as like a silver bullet being what could kill a vampire was common because they thought it could kill all kinds of deviant creatures or monsters. So it was also said to be able to kill werewolves. And that history could have originated from a variety of sources. One of them was including this French tale, so I'm probably going to butcher the names, and I apologize now, the Beast of Gavardin. In 1767, it was said that the hunter Jean Chastel killed the Beast of Gavardin with a silver bullet. Now, some of that is based on a distorted detail from a novel by a very French name, Histoire Fidèle de la Bête in Gavardin by Henry Prat. Yeah, I don't know, I probably butchered it. But in that novel, he imagines that Chastel melted down medals of the Virgin Mary and turned those into the silver bullets that killed the beast. So that's just an interesting...
And so you're having...
like a Christian
theme with versus...
And then in Swedish folklore, silver bullets are used to combat anything that is resistant to regular bullets.
Shoot a monster with regular bullets.
Can't say that I have.
But here's the thing with the silver. This is what I just thought was so ironic, because it talked about shooting a werewolf, that it was believed that the silver went into its system and the silver would get in its veins, and that's what would actually kill them. Except we use colloidal silver in our system to actually use as antibiotic or antibacterial, because even the Romans knew this. This is not new, just information. We make now colloidal silver, but the Romans would use it, and that's why their armor was in silver, because if they got stabbed or something, they would put that plate of silver around it, and it would keep it from getting gangrene and them losing a limb. So this has been around for a long time. That's probably where that whole... But it is interesting that they would take that and they would use it, that's what would actually kill them.
If you're killing evil, it's...
I guess.
Getting rid of bacteria.
However, I think if you're looking at it from the spiritual side, silver is usually linked to the angelic realm. Mm-hmm. So then we have the myth of the full moon and why that is linked to more with werewolves and stuff like that. Actually, some of this, the myth may have also originated from the belief that wolves howl at the full moon, which is scientifically false. In some European cultures, the January full moon is known as the wolf moon.
Interesting.
Because wolves howl as they search for food in the winter.
Oh, well, that makes sense.
So, you can see how they link all these things up together. And
And that is one thing I will say as a side note. I know a lot of people think that, like, oh, full moon doesn't change anything. Look, I can't explain why, but I've worked in the mental health field and the medical health field. You've also worked in the medical health field?
No.
I don't know what. Really? Throw me under the bus. Yeah, you are. I've met the other people in your life. I am not the only one.
That's when the bus go around.
And just as a side note, I can't fully explain it by any stretch, but as someone who's worked in the mental health field, and I think as you working
in the medical field,
there is something to a full moon having an impact on people.
Oh, and Halloween. Oh, good grief. I mean, the emergency rooms. Yes, I have worked at big hospitals and little hospitals, and there is. I mean, you just knew. Nurses braced for it, doctors braced for it, and just weird things. Or just, we'd have an uptick in heart attacks, or an uptick, or just, I mean, it would be swamped, and you just knew it. You just had to write that night off on your calendar. Because
the crisis stabilization unit would be the same way when there was a full moon. Just mental health crises got worse.
And they tried to say that there's absolutely no correlation, but we know better than that. We've worked in it. And if you have a nurse friend, they will tell you the same.
Mm-hmm. So in the 19th century, early vampire stories didn't connect vampires and bats, but Arthur Young's 1826 story, Papapican in Corsica, was one of the first to do that. And then in the Penny Dreadfuls, nothing to do with this penny, the image of vampires as bats spread quickly through cheap short story literature called Penny Dreadfuls.
You know, and I never realized that as being in drama in high school, and the kids, we didn't really do that one, but then when my kids were in drama, oh my gosh, at all these contests, so many of the Penny Dreadfuls came out, and I was like, when I first watched it, I was like, I have no clue what this is. And it wasn't until after probably the 4th year of seeing different versions of that play, it was like, that's right, that's a vampire? I had no clue.
Interesting.
Yeah. But it did make a big mark, and it still is, because even to this day, like I said, so many of the one-act film or one-act drama plays are from Penny Dreadfuls. So on that same theme, though, I think about all of the one-act plays that are around Dracula, and most of them, they're all funny. You know, they're all hilarious. In fact, I know that just even our little D2 school put on probably 6 different ones of that. But it's always a showstopper, and it's always something that's, you know...
Well, people like it.
And it epitomizes all of the myths.
It really does. And the popularization of Bram Stoker's Dracula just completely cemented that link between bats and vampires.
But the whole bat idea was not just from Bram Stoker's. Also, pre-Columbian bat depictions came up. And then the Christian belief in the mid-4th century, Basil of Caesarea argued that demons, like bats, fly through the air by means of fleshy membranes. So this is kind of where it's 1810 was when that vampire bat became official.
And some demons do have kind of fleshy wings like that. Sorry, you can cut that out.
So Kristen, when you think of Halloween, though, what is the other image that probably is the most famous?
A witch with a black hat and like a hooked nose and a pointy chin and an evil cackle.
And what are they riding?
A broom.
Broom. In the night sky. So as we get into witches, I was surprised at how many things they talked about witches and Wicca. Not the same.
Right. Not the same thing.
And yet they can be, but...
Right.
And Morlocks, and I mean, all this stuff kind of, it meshes together. But the witches go way back. We're going way back.
I mean, the Witch of Endor, biblically, that was a long time
But
ago.
she was actually a seer,
Mhm.
but that has to do with divination and
Sorcery.
contacting the dead.
Right.
And so that, yes, this is biblical. This goes way back, and God said, don't. Well, as we bring this up through the years, though,
So many of the things that we traditionally ascribe to witches, they have an interesting.
so where did the whole witches with the stirring the brew and stuff? Actually, believe it or not, and more than likely nobody that watches this is having little kids watch, especially with our decor. But
If
this
you
is
do-
a little disclaimer. You're probably gonna take your little ones off to the side.
Or your teenagers.
Yeah. So where did the whole witches with the brew and the broom and all that stuff come about? Actually, there is a pretty simple explanation for all of it. They would take herbs and mushrooms and all this stuff that they would find, and what they were concocting was like equivalent to LSD drug, really.
They were creating hallucinogens.
Yeah, and they would use the broom, which was usually that wispy part down, to stir it. It would suck up through that part of the broom and up into the handle. Now, you could not eat this stuff because it had nightshade. I mean, it had a lot of nasty stuff in it. It would make you extremely sick, or it could kill you.
Right.
But if it was put topically in some of the more sensitive areas, then that is how they would ingest this drug, this hallucinant drug. And it gave the feeling of flying. So, yeah,
They were.
the broom handles being what broom handles are, I guess, and phallic in nature. And this goes all the way back, way back. Paul talked about it, even they talked about it in the Old Testament. These rituals, the dancing, the concoctions they were hallucinogenic. And with the Egyptian thing with Osiris, and of course he was cut up by Horus into 12 parts, thrown into the Nile River. His wife went out and gathered all those parts.
One was missing.
And so she created a phallus. And then that's how she impregnated herself. I mean, this is mythology. That's kind of what this is. Some of this is Mythbusters, but where this came from. Well, anyway, so that's where you get the broom handle and
riding a broom.
And then it was the whole sensation of flying. So that's kind of where this came from. What I really was blown away at was all of the oil paintings throughout. We're talking centuries that were done, and they were not flattering of these women from behind, but this was more European. And actually, when I was looking at them, I'm like, wow. I mean, they were just standing there, and they had more of the prominent noses and the chins, and it's amazing how that has morphed into what we have now.
What about black hats? Did you find anything about that?
Ultimately, when they would do this, yes, they would put on hats, they would put on these garments, they would ride their brooms,
take off
and get high. You know, and when we think about it now, people are doing it with drugs all the time, and probably a lot of other stuff that they're experimenting with. They were doing it way back when. But of course, then you get into the 1800s and the witch trials, 1700s, 1800s, and they were torturing people and getting them to confess to things that probably were not even true.
Right.
But if they were under so much torture, they thought if they told them what they wanted to hear, they would let them go, and they didn't, and then they were burning people at the stake. And
that's also not of God.
No. And some of the things, then, there were actual, I mean, our pharmakia, even some of the drugs we take, I mean, it is herbal. I mean, God has created all this stuff, but depending on what, they might have been even making mixtures of painkillers for people or different things for ailments. And if people saw that, they were linking it to all this other stuff and sexual deviation, and then boom, immediately they were going way off course.
Right.
But like we said, this isn't new. This whole witches on the broomsticks goes all the way back to 1453. That's the first recorded, written down from Eldon of Saint Germain in Paris.
But again, there were oral traditions
And that
long
was while they
before
were
that.
being tortured, and
Right.
yeah. So, but what I found was interesting, it had to do a lot of times with some of this ancient stuff with fertility rites and rituals, and we've talked about that. That goes all the way back to Mesopotamia, and again, all of those ancient pagan cultures and the different fertility
gods and goddesses and the things
what
that they
did.
required in order to promise you fertility.
And the dancing and the words and the, yeah, I mean, so this is, I suppose, a branch of that.
Right. There's nothing new under the sun.
It's Kristen.
Yes.
We've talked about witches, and what kind of goes along with the witches that you think of in Halloween?
Well, unless you've got a leaking air hose, I'm guessing you're going with a cat. Come on, we had to lighten it up a little bit after that.
So we're talking about black cats.
That's right.
Where do the black cats come from?
Well, it's interesting actually, because cats and humans are connected back in ancient Greece and ancient Egypt. I mean, cats were considered...
Ah, so here we go to Egypt again.
Imagine that. Everything always traced back to Egypt. So in Egyptian history and culture, cats were considered a divine symbol. There's a goddess in Greek mythology that's the goddess of magic, sorcery, and the moon and witchcraft. And she was described as having a cat as a pet and a familiar, which is a supernatural creature that assists the witch, according to European folklore. See Sabrina the Teenage Witch. She has a familiar in a black cat. Just as a side note, sorry.
That's right.
Yes.
So we have this right now. The kids are watching.
Well, that was more when yeah, kids today.
That's in cartoon form or something. I don't know. It's on rerun.
It is. It's good. And written records link black cats to the occult as far back as the 13th century, interestingly enough. Pope Gregory IX, in a document called Vox in Rama, said black cats were declared the incarnation of Satan. And that really kind of started the witch hunts in that time in Rome.
So all these things are kind of linked in a way throughout all of history. Again, what we see now and sensationalized, and you walk down any Halloween aisle and it's all cats and witches and Dracula and bats and skeletons
and while that in and of itself, what we do with it doesn't have to be anything bad, but understanding, like we said last time, where some of that came from.
Well, and the Day of the Dead, and again, usually it's trying to resurrect something. When you get right down to it, this is coming from the demonic side as far as the resurrecting from the dead, the opening a portal, and that's what it always is. They believe that's when the veil was the thinnest, and it's trying to bring back whatever spirits are out there. Well, that is actually what we're going to see, what we talked about in Revelation. That is what's going to happen. So without people even realizing it, a lot of this stuff that's going on is actually just a precursor to what's going to happen. It's just a matter of they're looking for that door to open.
Right.
And what we talked about witches, and we said there's that, and then there's the category of Wicca. Witches are the practice, Wicca is the religion. And we might actually, I think we're going to have to get into that at another time on its own segment, because there's just way too much there.
Yeah.
We're going to leave that kind of alone for now. So I think for now, we're just, for time strength, we're going to keep it kind of where we were at with witches for Halloween. But the jack-o'-lantern was Irish folktale about a man named Jack.
Imagine that.
Or Stingy Jack. And the tradition of carving jack-o'-lanterns to scare away the wandering soul.
But it didn't start out with pumpkins.
No, it started out with gourds, but in the 1800s, pumpkins were a lot more prevalent in America. And so when they came over here and ruled New England, children would carve faces into pumpkins, light them up, and hang them on sticks to scare people or to keep him at bay. Then there is one other character that we wanted to bring about, This will help us branch into the aliens and ufology and the biggest coming deception. Why we really want to look at it.
Right.
Pretty hard. But here's where we get the bridge. Because if you've ever heard of sleep paralysis, which we could spend almost a whole episode on that. And have you ever heard of the shadow man or the hat man?
I have.
So a lot of people say that this is all myth and that it happens during that sleep time, the REM time, where you all of a sudden you wake up but your body hasn't yet, and you're kind of alert but your body's in that paralysis state. Mm-hmm. And then you start hallucinating, and you can sometimes see this man standing in the corner or beside you. And he always looks the same. You're getting a chill. Mm-hmm. He always looks the same. He's just black. You can't see any features. He's in a trench coat, sometimes maybe red eyes, but mostly not. And he has a fedora hat. Mm-hmm. The problem is they've tried to say that this guy is just an hallucination.
And that it's something that, like, from watching scary things or hearing scary things, you know.
But this goes all the way back to BC. Mm-hmm. Like this entity.
2400 BC or something like that.
And it is a fear, a nightmarish fear. I mean, that is so paralyzing, so grasping that people can't hardly even breathe. Mm-hmm. He never touches you, but it is just that fear that you can't shake. I would argue that because people all over the world have seen him throughout all of the millennial, and they describe the exact same thing.
And experiences and the feeling. I can...
So you've had that experience?
I have twice.
And you said once
before.
Way back when.
Uh-huh. Like, I've woken up thinking I heard something and I've been scared before. My kids have gotten up and startled me awake or, different things. And I've had nightmares and bad dreams at different times and woken up being scared. Even in spiritual warfare, nothing has ever compared to the fear that I felt before I even saw him. Like, I woke up and I was literally paralyzed with fear. And I didn't want to open my eyes because I knew that I was going to be scared of whatever that I saw. Now, the first time it happened, that's not how it happened. The first time, like, I woke up and just, like, looked over and saw the shadowy figure in the corner in my room. And it hit, and I just started screaming bloody murder because I could not move, and I knew that someone was in my room. Like, I didn't know at that point. I thought there was a person in there. Like, I had no idea. I just woke up and there was a shadow in the corner. And my poor roommate comes running in from the other room and was like, what in the world? And, like, flipped on the light, and I'm like, there's someone in here. And then it was gone. But it took us both quite a while to settle down because I got up screaming bloody murder. But just that fear and then not being able to move. Like, I couldn't even run away or get away. Now this time, the last two times that it happened here, not here at the church, but here where I live now, the first time it was again, and it's interesting, I didn't realize until today when we were kind of talking about this, that the layout of my room is almost identical to the room that it happened in the first time, and I saw him in the same corner. But that time I felt the fear before I opened my eyes. And then the second time when it happened again, but he was closer, like next to me. Again, didn't touch me. There was no, but I can't even put, like, you could cut the fear with a knife. I mean, it was palpable and tangible. And I could not move and I could not breathe, and I was not going to scream because I knew by then I wasn't going to scare the crap out of my kids. Like, that wouldn't be fair, and that wouldn't, you know what I mean? But just that there just aren't words than to say you could feel the fear and it was tangible.
Well, and I've had those times too, off and on, where I did not open my eyes, but yeah, you did. I mean, it was a demonic fear. I mean, it was so powerful. And you're going through every hymn and hymnal singing in your head and reciting scripture, and yeah.
Me reminding myself what is in me is greater than what is in the world. What is in me is greater than what is in the world.
Mm-hmm. And the name of Christ covers it all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, here is one of the tidbits that is very interesting. This is, however, Christopher French, a psychology professor at Goldsmith University of London, told the paper that while people can experience various different types of hallucinations, certain themes tend to occur more often than others. In the Middle Ages, he added, sleep paralysis was blamed on sex-crazed demons who had their wicked ways with their paralyzed, helpless victims. All right, why do I say that? And why do I bring this up? Because we are going to get into the whole alien UFOlogy thing. And here is where you've heard the stories, you've heard all the stories of where people were abducted by aliens, and usually what has been done onto them but fertility experiments. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that that's what that guy is, but there is definitely a correlation. And again, these aliens, they are demonic. They are not from another planet. They are not those who have created our earth or created us. So I just thought that was so interesting that this guy's talking right here that this was going on in the Middle Ages. Mm-hmm. They weren't talking about demons in the Middle Ages.
No, and they did not have the internet and all of the same access to this information that we have now. They would have barely been able to disseminate written literature around the world to have that phenomenon happening in multiple locations.
Well, and they say right here, this goes back even further, citing Mesopotamia legend from around 2400 BC. Mm-hmm. And later, Judaic tradition of Lilith. So here we get into this. Lilith again.
Enters again.
Yep. She was the one who steals upon men at night in order to breed half human, half demon babies, which is the Nephilim. Greek physician Paulus Aganita in the 7th century thought sleep paralysis was caused by Pan, the fawn-like god of nature and wild, leaping onto the chest of victims. Okay, so here we have, again, we're talking about gods and goddesses, little g's. Mm-hmm. We're talking about the demonic realm. We're talking about the fallen realm. This stuff that's going on, well, we think it's fun. Oh, Count Dracula, mm-hmm. even Sesame Street. Mm-hmm. Oh, one.
Just know
that, well, you can still go out and you can get candy and you can dress in your princess costume and you can dress in your, Bob the Builder that was dating me along, your pumpkins, whatever. So we talked about, whether you do Halloween or not. Mm-hmm. And even not participating in the darkness, but there is another side to it. There's a lot of churches that do the trunk or treat for kids, mm-hmm. and allows them just to put on costumes and dress up and go get some candy and do fun games.
And they give out most of the churches will give out little things that talk about Jesus, and it gets people to come to the church. Those are all good things, Mm-hmm. And it's a free, a lot of times, family fun evening, and it's a safe place to go.
And the other thing too, when I was working at the hospital, there was a lady it was a much older lady who was in one of the housekeeping departments, and she's like, you're going to bring, Chantel was 6 months old. She's like, you're going to bring your daughter, aren't you? You're going to bring Chantel. I said, sure, because we had a cute little pumpkin outfit for her. I said, I'll make sure we stop. And when we did, she had this little smiley face ball and a box of Titty Grahams. And I remember a couple other things. She had this whole little sack just for Chantel. And this woman's face was just from ear to ear beaming. Mm-hmm. This is a time that a lot of people don't think about it. For the older generation, they don't get to see kids anymore. They don't get to have that energy and that excitement and that fun and seeing them in their costumes and giving them candy.
So going to the nursing homes, taking your kids there.
Exactly, and the assisted living. So do that. Don't just hit. I know a lot of people, it's like, oh, hit the rich houses.
You get the good candy there.
But really, in all honesty, go to those nursing homes. Go to the assisted livings. Go to the older people that just get so much joy out of seeing
Your kids.
So a lot of folklore, a lot of traditions. And while it is fun, I mean, depending on if you get into Halloween or not, but know that it does have evil roots to it.
Right.
And again, it is a time when we do believe that veils do get thin.
Right.
And that's the whole point of some of this is that other realm's trying to open up portals. They're preparing for. But as Christians, we know we can take heart because Christ said he has overcome the world. And yes, when you have Christ in your heart, he who is in you
is greater than
he who is in the world. So we hope you've enjoyed this episode. It's been a little fun, but we wanted to give you a little history and to, as we said, shine light
into the darkness
and bring about truth
and the mystery of the myth.
So until next time.
Shalom.